Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nocode North and the Northern Showcase. We've taken Penny Bench, a former stage manager, now Webflow developer in Trenton, Ontario, and I handle communications for Nocode North.
I'm Jeremy LaRue, a writer-director turned Webflow low-code developer from Vancouver. On the Nocode North team, I'm the resident automations guy and the runner of streams.
Hi, I'm Maggie Monso. I'm a Webflow developer based in Toronto with a background in film and television. In our Nocode North group, I take care of our designs and our gather space.
Our mission at Nocode North is twofold. First, to build a community of Canadian Webflowers and no-code enthusiasts, and secondly, to showcase that Canadian talent to the rest of the world. We meet Fridays at noon Eastern in our lodge, our gather space, and once a month we host the Northern Showcase here on our YouTube channel.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. I'm on the wrong window, but let me see who's in today. I'm sorry, guys. I was not looking at the right window, and I can't find it. So, Penny, do you have an eye on who's there? Could you say hi? I'm so sorry.
I don't either, but I'm sure there's some wonderful people. Jeremy, do you see people in the chat?
We'll skip it for today.
If you're in the chat, say hi, because either that or the chat is not working. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, anyway.
We'll skip it today, but thanks for joining us anyways. And if you have any questions for Dayton or for our guest, put it in the chat and we'll either get through it during the stream or get to them at the end during the Q&A. Thanks.
Great. And just before we get into the interview, we want to let you know that we're hosting a meetup in Vancouver on Monday, June 19th at 7 p.m. So if you're in the area, we'd love to have you come and join us. We're just going to have dinner. There's no presentations, no slides, nothing. It's just good old-fashioned Canadian get-to-know-you kind of meetup on the waterfront. So we look forward to meeting you, and visit our website and our Twitter to get the link to go join us.
On today's Northern Showcase, we're getting to know Dayton Pereira. Dayton is the founder of Ready, Set, Go, a product design company and product design school based in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario. He's been a product designer for 20 years and is just as passionate about the space now as the day he started. His company has launched dozens of products over the last 2 decades, for both little startups just getting off the ground to multinational enterprises whose products reach millions of users.
And so,
all right, let's welcome Dayton.
Is it Friday?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was answering someone on the chat. Hey, how's it going?
I
promise we're better than
level
this.
in awkward pauses. It's perfect. My favorite space. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, we're really great. Glad you're able to join us.
Of course.
So I've been hearing that you're kind of really into food. Are there favorite Canadian foods that you like, or are your tastes sort of more broad ranging?
I think, as Canada goes, and as as diverse of a country we are, especially in metropolitan Toronto or even in Waterloo for that matter, it's hard to really pin down exactly a clear definition of Canadian food. I think we have the luxury of being able to eat pretty much every cuisine that's brought over here, and mix it with the kinds of things that we love. I mean, you can get a bulgogi poutine, you can get a shawarma poutine, you can get pretty much any kind of poutine and pizza that there is. So there's this wonderful sort of mix and mashing of all these different cuisines that just make it amazing. So yeah,
right.
I wouldn't say there's any particular one. I like them all.
Okay. All right. Excellent. But obviously it sounds like poutine is definitely on the menu from time to time.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Excellent. Cool. All right. So wanted to ask you a little bit about this because you're surprised they keep finding so much about you. But
apparently I'm really easy to, oh God.
Absolutely.
Hilarious. Yeah.
Yes, we did mention you've been around for a while. So tell us a little bit about this event, or
Sure.
what was
So
going on.
FITC, I think it started a little earlier than 2004, maybe 2003. And it's still running right now, actually. It used to stand for Flash in the Can, and now it stands for some other acronym that doesn't include the word Flash. But if you rewind, 20 years ago, the sort of the game-changing piece of sort of design and web technology was one called Flash, where we had animations and vector-based animations that were really tiny in file size, so you could deliver these really compelling experiences over the internet um, without having to, consume a ton of bandwidth. And for the first 6-7 years of my business, that started in 2000, June of 2000. That's what we focused on. And so FITC was an event that I shockingly won that award. My friend Sean Pucknell, who still runs it, was part of that. And when we didn't have YouTube and Twitter or any of those other all the social media that we have right now, we congregated in little bars in Kensington Market in Toronto. And that's where we would have Flash events in person and share code and teach each other how to do cool things. So yeah, that was that award.
Cool.
Yeah,
So-
I'm definitely not the best Canadian designer. That is not well deserved. That is crazy.
Well, I don't know. Given the things we're going to talk about here, I'm sure there are some who might disagree. Anyway, so before you got into design and all
Yeah.
of that, you were in a very different field. You studied chemical engineering.
That's right. Yes.
And-
Chem class of '99 U of T.
Yeah. And before U of T, you were at Budapest University of Technology and Economics.
Yeah,
okay, so
I did 2
what's the
years.
story there?
Okay, so I have to rewind before Budapest as well. So I grew up in Dubai in the 80s.
Cool.
And so I went to elementary and high school there. And at the time in 1993, there weren't any colleges or universities that you could actually go to after you were done high school. So my parents had a friend of theirs whose son also went to Budapest for some kind of engineering degree. I'm Indian, and so there were only two career paths for me. It was either med school or engineering or a lawyer. So I chose engineering because yeah, so I was shipped off to Budapest by myself and did 2 years of school there until my family immigrated to Canada, and I moved with them and then transferred to U of T.
Aha. Okay, so that's how that all worked. So,
Yeah.
were you really into chemical engineering? Because it seems
No.
like you left that, got your degree, and moved
Oh yeah,
totally
no.
away.
Yeah, I did not do a day of chemical engineering. By hearting the periodic table was cool, but I don't think it had any practical use. Quickly after, the kinds of work that was available for chemical engineers at the time was mostly in oil refinery, food engineering, or food processing. There was a bunch of other things, but I didn't really want to do any of those. My dad was an entrepreneur, and so he started like a computer training center. That was a terrible idea, by the way. And I decided that I would help him get that business off the ground. And so I became the instructor at his computer training center, teaching retired old people how to use Word and Excel. And that was hilarious, actually. It was kind of funny.
Yeah. Like, how old were you at that point?
I would have been 21, I think.
Okay.
21, 22.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
And so after I do my day work of training, I would teach myself Photoshop and Illustrator and Flash because it was like the new cool thing that was
Right.
online. And so I figured if I taught myself these things, my test was, can I teach myself enough of it that I can build something that I could actually be gainfully employed doing the thing that I taught myself.
Right.
And so like 4 or 5 months later, I was, and I got my first job as a web designer at the glamorous Ontario College of Pharmacists. Oh yeah, it was not glamorous at all. Anyways.
And so, but why go that direction? Was that because of that connection with your dad in the computer school, or were you always
No,
interested in
actually,
design?
my brother was a software engineer, and he worked at a company called Newrun.
Okay.
And so he was a developer, and at his company, he would like we would talk. We were really close. So he would tell me about all the cool things that they were doing, and their design process and whatnot. And I was like, yo, I could do that. That sounds kind of interesting, like right up my alley. So yeah, so
Right.
I got into it, and
Right.
then I got into it pretty deep.
Yeah, I guess because you've actually worked on some major projects. But
Yeah.
let's talk before we get into that. Let's just talk about flirting. First agency was in Blue your first agency?
Yes. So Indus Blue was the company
Okay.
that I started in 2000.
Mhm.
And I ran that till about 2012.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was the first one. So we had a good 12-year run on that company.
Well, and I would say that you did. So you worked on a lot of the big media projects that were online at the time, at least here in Canada.
Good.
So what was that first big project that you got, and how did
Yeah.
you get it?
Okay, so this is actually a really good story. I don't get to tell it often. I was so this was around. Penny, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. I don't see you anymore, so it's just me.
No, it's
Okay,
just you. It's your
got it.
story.
So this would have been prior to 2006, so it might have been in 2005. I was invited to a high school to talk about what I did. And so in that high school, I was on a panel at this particular high school. And on that panel was another woman from the CBC, who was also sharing some of her experiences as a UX designer. I don't know if we called ourselves UX designers back in 2005, but that's what she was. At the end of it, she asked me, "Hey, I really liked, some of the stuff that you were talking about. I think you'd be a great candidate if you were interested in helping us with some of the work at CBC." I said, "Sure, that'd be really cool." And what she was actually talking about was an RFP that the CBC had issued to build and design the Torino Olympic website for CBC in 2006. And
Right.
so, we put a good pitch together. We undercut absolutely everybody by doing it for super cheap as a really tiny company. And we won that piece of business. And that became the start of a very long sort of repeat type work that we did for many Olympic properties for the next 8 years. So yeah, that was the big start with the CBC, and the big sort of the takeaway from that story is, there's opportunities. You never know when a good opportunity is going to come your way, and so if you can create collisions and encounters with even some of the smallest organizations, like that high school that I went to,
Mhm.
you never really know where some life-changing opportunities can happen. And that was one that really changed the trajectory of our entire business. So at 2006 we did Torino. 2008 was, I think it was Beijing. And then 2010 is when CBC lost the rights to the Olympics and I went to CTV. And so we followed that to CTV, and we worked on some other part of the property. It was like a second screen app or something like that for CTV. And that's when things really went crazy. It was interesting at that point. But if you want to know more about that, I'll tell you. But I could just keep going on. So maybe you have
you can. Well, no, I'm happy to listen to whatever stories you have to share, because I think there's, I think probably most of the people who will watch this are younger or don't have this experience. If they're a little older, they may have come into this world from some other career originally. So I think people would be really interested to know more about, what it's like working with those sorts of media organizations, and what kind of challenges you ran into with them.
Sure. So the kinds of work that we were doing at the time was partially web development, partially app development. It was more experiential type stuff. We were doing, I think we did so CBC became a long-standing client. I think they were a client of ours for like 6 or 7 years. But something really interesting happened with the 2010 Winter Olympics, the Canadian Winter Olympics. And that was, the iPhone launched in 2008 for the very first time. 2009 is when the App Store came out. And a lot of the media companies at the time didn't have any apps in the App Store. In fact, the ecosystem of media companies here, so Bell, Rogers, CTV at the time, that's now owned by Bell, didn't have anything. And so we pitched, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had a Vancouver 2010 Olympic app for CTV? They accepted our pitch. We had no idea how to build apps, and we had 4 months to do it.
Oh, my word.
That was wild. And so we hustled. And that's actually when we shifted our company from being a Flash company, building Flash-based microsites for ad campaigns and advertising agencies that we had done for about 7 years, into an app dev company. And we just flipped that switch overnight, taking the massive risk. It's like, okay, we gotta, like, if we want to win big, you gotta take big risks. That's not always true. You gotta take educated risks, and I think this one was an educated one.
Right.
How big? We were not that big. Our company was probably around, I'd say, 10 people at the time. Yeah, around 10. And then when we did the Olympic app, we were probably 14 or 15. What was really interesting about the Olympic app is that it made us this app company. And quickly after that, we built the first generation apps for MTV. And this is all for Canada. So MTV Canada, Much Music. I built the TSN iPad app. That was the #1 rated app in the App Store for a year. It won App of the it was a runner-up for App of the Year that year. That was a TSN iPad app. And then I can't even remember. We built so many apps. It was like app bonanza.
Right. And Patrick says he loves how you guys changed your focus after you got the pitch.
Well, you always want to, you don't really know. So at that time, there was this fork in the road that, believe it or not, AR was actually really popular back in 2009. AR with Flash, using the webcam or a camera on your phone, because AR, there was a thing called paper vision in Flash that was released, and you can create these really cool little AR objects that could look at a marker on your desk and whatnot and realize this little Flash 3D character. I know AR is like super popular now, but trust me, it was popular then too. Um, and it was do more stuff with augmented reality with webcams or build apps. And we chose apps, and I think we chose right.
Right, right. Now, when I was doing my research, I came across a video where you were talking about
I'm
having
always nervous with these videos you bring up, Penny.
I know. Well, this one was about having spent a lot of time building an app. I think it was in maybe one of the app presentations you're talking about prototyping, but spending a lot of time building an app that which sounds like augmented reality or like additional content. I think it was
Synchro.
the Survivor.
Yeah.
So what was the impetus for that? Where did that idea come from, and
sure,
why didn't it work?
It worked because we mistranslated some research that we looked at. It wasn't a mistranslation. It was a biased interpretation of research. So let me give you the context. So around, I think it was probably 2012 or 2013, this idea of a second screen app was like a big thing, which was Google at the time had come out with this research that people, while watching their favorite TV shows, were all their attention wasn't committed to that TV show. So instead, they were using their phones as a second screen device to do a bunch of other stuff. And so the hypothesis was, well, if they're using their phones to do other stuff, perhaps we can convince them to use their phones to do the same stuff that they were watching, that they were doing, but maybe some complementary stuff to the content that they were watching. So we spent a bunch of time building these tools, like little trivia things, live content that would actually show up on their phone. So Twitter was still big at the time, but they didn't have all these, they didn't have the second screen experience that you can get right now with Twitter, or like you could even get back then with Twitter. And because, when you're a media company and you own the rights to content, you can do more things than platforms that don't have the rights to it. So we wanted to build these second screen experiences with broadcast in mind. So what we ended up doing was, the hypothesis was that people will actually do this while watching their show. And instead of doing our due diligence and research, we just said, fuck it, let's go build a product. So the product that we built was this thing called Synchro, where we had a number of different things that you can push into a timeline using like a web editor, and then that would synchronize with your phone using WebSockets and all kinds of other fun stuff for the time. When we went and we pitched it to all of our media customers, they didn't care to look at the demo. So we had spent, I think, about 5 months building this thing with code, deploying it in an app as an APK for Android, and something we did for iPhone as well. And the only thing they really cared about was like looking at the slides in PowerPoint. And I was like, I could have saved 4 months and gotten the no way earlier than spending 4 months of dev time only to get the no later. So yeah, there was a lack of interest, because I think our hypothesis was wrong, that people didn't want to do the same thing that they were looking at or consuming, or doing some complementary action to the content they were consuming on TV. They wanted to do something flat out different. They wanted to play Angry Birds while watching their show,
Right.
not answer trivia questions about the stuff that was actually showing up. So
Right.
that was a failed experiment, but it was a good lesson to learn, after doing it.
Yeah, I'm sure that and we'll actually probably come back to that a little later on around, how the lessons from that experience affect how you work now.
Sure.
But I also wanted to point out, just in case anybody doesn't find this because they didn't dig deep, you were on the short list for the Cannes Cyber Lion Award
Was
a
I?
couple of times. See, told you. The
Honestly,
internet never forgets.
maybe. What was it
No,
for? Do you
no,
remember the
for
project?
Nokia.
Oh
Nokia Push
yeah,
to
that's we have
Start and
pushed to start.
Nestea.
Yeah,
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 and of
yeah.
course
That's true.
those projects aren't online now, so I can't go check them out. But
Yeah, so
it,
we had actually done those two projects with an advertising agency. Which ones were they? Oh, I can't even remember the ad agencies they were. We basically created a Pong game for the Nokia Push to Start. It was a really cool game, and the graphics that we created were inspired by your fingers. So we had a running game. The game that you see, that little pixel game of the dinosaur that's jumping when your Chrome browser doesn't have any internet.
right.
You
Yep.
basically use the cursor and it's a little side-scrolling jumpy game.
Mhm.
So that was the game, but we had the whole idea with the Nokia campaign was hands, and so we had these pixel hands that I traced and sort of created one pixel at a time. Pixel graphics were like a really big deal back then, and so one
Yeah.
of the games was this running game with a hand that was jumping over things. That was hilarious. And then the next one was a Pong game, also with two pixel hands. They were like this moving, and there was like a Pong battle.
Right.
And they were
Right.
multiplayer and stuff. It was really fun.
Right.
Nestea had these commercials where there's a guy that, on the TV spot, uh, you'd be standing and then somebody falls backwards and falls into a pool of Nestea. And so our concept was, once you fall into this pool, what happens? What is this magical space that you've fallen into? And so we create an entire world and a video game of a character that dives under this Nestea world and fights octopuses and crazy things. Yeah, that was a cool game. That was a
Oh,
Nestea game.
excellent.
But I mean, we did have a lot of fun with Flash and the kinds of work that we did do.
Yeah.
So it was some pretty creative stuff that we got a chance to work on back in the day, for sure.
Yeah. So when Flash, so you transitioned away from Flash, but why did you transition away from that? Because it was sort of becoming
Well, it
a little
was,
more obsolete, or?
yeah. So Flash didn't run on phones. The iPhone basically killed Flash.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, well, the iPhone and Adobe,
Okay.
uh,
Yes.
you know, um, so when the iPhone basically said that no, we're never going to be running Flash, it was a sign of end times are here for this
Right.
platform that we grew up with. Well, that I basically built my career on.
Right.
But a lot of those skills and understanding of how to build interfaces and user experiences and creating really engaging ones, like the idea of like microtransactions and stuff, or micro interactions that we have right now, all of those things were like a natural part of how you just work in Flash. Where
Right.
everything that you hover on does all kinds of magical, crazy stuff. There's loaders and loaders for loaders, and there used to be this website called Pretty Loaded. That, if you're a Flash designer, you would aspire to have the preloader that you designed for this giant Flash website. That preloader, if it ever showed up on Pretty Loaded, was like a big deal. Like
Right.
you've won the you've
Right.
been crowned the king of designing a crazy preloader.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and of course, from a UX perspective, that's a ridiculous idea, right? Like you should never have a
Mhm.
preloader for a site, because that's only saying that you haven't really optimized your site so that it can actually start with content instead it starts with a preloader.
Right.
Anyways,
Right.
so
And
yeah,
so,
so that was an ST. And
right. And so after Flash, what did you move to? Like, how did you start creating or
so
continue
working
creating what you were doing?
so working with the CBC, immediately put us into, into the more app development side of things. We did work on another project called Hockeyville. And that's when we really started getting quite serious about application development and like being able to support applications that had boatloads of traffic. So whenever you build something for a media property, that media property's job is to maximize the audience that particular property gets. And so we built this contest type product for Craft. It was called Craft Hockeyville. And I think that program still runs right now. I just don't think it's with Craft anymore. Maybe it's with Scotiabank. I can't remember. So essentially what you do is you've got to vote on the hockeyest town in Canada. Right. And all the hockey towns submit, like stories and letters around why they should be crowned the Hockeyville. And then once all the stories are submitted, then the next round is around voting for those for the top town. And the voting was crazy. And so we really had to learn, again, what we now just casually call DevOps. We had to teach ourselves, DevOps and server infrastructure. Again, there was no cloud computing at the time. So, we would actually work with Rackspace to provision actual servers that all of this traffic would actually run through. And so we started to become quite good on the application development side of things and provisioning services and applications for huge amounts of traffic. That was also really spiky. So, when just recently, of course, it doesn't nearly compare, but, spiky traffic like the Ron DeSantis announcement just recently.
A disaster.
So those are the kinds of things that, we would have to plan for and experience downtime as well. It absolutely happened. There was no question about it.
Sure.
Because it's completely unpredictable. There's better ways to provision things right now and sort of brute force test all of your environments. But, we had to learn all of that pretty quickly back in the day. So.
Right. And your brute force testing was probably the event itself. Like, okay, now we're live.
Yeah.
Let's cross our fingers. Right?
Okay, add more servers, actually.
Just kept going. All right. So I think you've had a number of different agencies over the years, but let's move to where you are now with Ready, Set, Go.
Sure.
What did
sure.
you close those other ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's the idea behind Ready, Set, Go?
Sure. So I ran dev shops for about 16 years, and we did lots of development. I was always on the user experience side of things, the design side of things. That was always my thing. Sort of, I wanted to start clean, with no partners this time with Ready, Set, Go. And I really wanted to focus on, I was actually really inspired by this one event that I went. It was Jeff Gotthelf's event, Lean Canvas, Lean Startup, one of them. I think he wrote a book. And I was like, okay, I want to really implement a lot of these Lean UX practices. I think it was called Lean UX, actually, by Jeff Gotthelf. And I was like, I want to design, I got really good for a long time at building good software, like really high quality software. But just because the software was good doesn't mean the idea behind it was any good. So it would run really well, but it might have been a terrible idea. Like that Synchro example I gave you of the second screen content, like excellently built, terrible idea. And so I really wanted to focus our efforts on, or my efforts in my career at that point, on designing the right thing instead of designing the thing right. And at the time, Lean UX was coming up, design sprints were coming up. I was finally afforded a framework through which we could actually do that. It's like, okay, there's a actual prescribed process that we can use to validate ideas before we spend a fortune and time and money and effort on, building a hypothesis that might turn out to be false. So this whole idea of prototyping, testing small pieces, running experiments, all of that work was what I wanted to focus our business on, or my business on at the time. And that's what we do now. So again, however, so we work with a bunch of customers, we did design sprints, and we're like, okay, here's the thing, here you go. And they're like, well, what am I going to do with this great idea that you've told me is going to work because we've done all these tests and you're correct? I can't build this. And so then it was just getting back to me. It was like, okay, Dayton, now you have to build it. I'm like, okay. So yeah, I've never been able to get away with not building things and just designing them.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about design sprints, and
Sure.
and because I think you have a little different approach than what most people think of as a design sprint. So maybe if you want to sort of talk about design sprints in general, and then how you approach doing design sprints.
Sure. So it's not completely different. So the design sprint book written by Jake Knapp is really the thing that propelled a lot of and really inspired me to do like the work that we do right now. And it's a 5-day process where you understand, you diverge, convert, you prototype and test. And that's pretty standard even in the design thinking process, which I believe is underpinned, that design sprints are underpinned by. So the thing that we do a little bit differently, because we're in the services business and we do design sprints as services, we'll do the first 3 parts with a group, with our customer. So we'll do the understand phase with that I like to do my homework on as well. And then we'll do a diverge and converge phase with our customer. So we generate a bunch of ideas, we try to narrow them down and prioritize them and identify which are the ones that are worth testing. And then we'll actually take that back and we'll do the prototyping and the user testing against those. So that's how we've split that up from design sprints that you might run internally in an organization versus design sprints that you might hire us to run for you. So that's really the main difference. For the most part, all of the phases are still the same. We just changed who does what and when. And sometimes we'll spread it out based on the availability of the customer.
Right, because essentially trying to get like the major players in a company to give you 5 days of their time.
It's hard.
I bet.
It's hard / impossible, actually.
Right.
Like it might work, in a smaller organization, in a startup where you're working with the founder and they're going to commit all of their time. It may not even be a startup. It might be like an established company, like one of my customers, Riverside Millwork. That the work that we did with them started with a design sprint. Another one of my customers that runs a staffing company called Trucker. Also, that work also started with a design sprint, and they're still customers. Like, I think 6 or 7 years later, yeah, they're still customers.
Right.
And those design sprints were, they were focused on running and identifying a very specific problem and how we might solve it. And they were not 5 days though; they were still 2 days, and they were all those rough sketches in the same way that I just described. And then our job was to take those, rough sketches and sort of fledgling ideas and put them together into high fidelity mock-up in Figma, or Sketch at the time, Figma now, so that we could present what that actually looked like and then test it with people.
Right. Because I was reading about the Riverside Millwork project, and that sort of kind of ties into your jobs to be done idea, I think, right? It's like you're part of that process is sort of
Yeah.
identifying
So
what
again,
needs to happen.
jobs to be done is a process that we use, developed by Clay Christensen, the late Clay Christensen. Essentially, what the question it's presented in a really weird way, which I really love because it makes you think about products in a different way. It's, what job are you hiring this product to do? And if you are hiring, so his classic example is, what job are you hiring a milkshake to do? Because if you ever look up this piece, it's this milkshake example that he gives you. Then you can really start to understand what a person's objectives were for actually buying a milkshake.
Right.
And it was for, because you were hungry, or you were traveling far, or you didn't want to drink too many liquids during your long commute, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can use that framework to understand, sort of components of, or understand why your customer is behaving a certain way, and why they are hiring your product, or why they need your product, and what pain they're trying to relieve as a result of getting it.
Right. Right. So it's sort of that customer journey in a way. And
Yeah, I think that the jobs to be done is more of it's like an empathy exercise. So understanding, the like the surrounding, the work that the customer's trying to do, what their pains are, and why they're trying to do it.
right. And that's quite different than just saying, oh, you need one of these, one of those, it's like we need to,
Yeah.
provide this information to our client and let's just build a website. That's a
Yes,
very
exactly.
different.
So
much
again,
more
like,
involved
when we
process.
build websites now, it's okay, well, what are you hiring? I, as the proprietor of the business, for example, what am I hiring my website to do? Is it just there to show cool text and fun images, or is it actually there to do work, like,
Right.
generate leads, or nurture opportunities, or share information, or drive business, right?
Right.
And that sort of
Right.
comes full circle as to, using some of the tools that we can use right now.
Right.
And the simpler those tools are, and the more effective they are at allowing the products that you do to do their jobs, those are the tools you want to use.
Right. Right. So speaking of tools, you moved to Webflow at one point quite a few years ago. What
Yep.
what drew you to Webflow in the first place, and how,
So,
how has it changed, or has it changed how you approach
yeah,
work?
sure. So coming from, custom software, and we've used like every CMS under the sun. We've actually used WordPress in an enterprise level, at an enterprise level as well. So, building, for example, the CHL, Canadian Hockey League, is comprised of 3 leagues: the Ontario Hockey League, the Western Hockey League, and the QMJHL. I think they compose around 70 something sites. They're all powered by WordPress, and we built it.
Right.
So we built an entire infrastructure. It's like WordPress on steroids, to be able to manage all 70 sites,
Right.
using single template or multiple templates with components and whatnot.
Mhm.
And while all of that is cool, it's still very engineering heavy. And so what we're looking for, or what Webflow offered at the time, was something more customizable than Squarespace and Wix, and was true to just outputting and generating clean HTML, unlike Dreamweaver back in the day. And you could put your own classes on it, and you could embed code, and you can drop in a bit of JavaScript, do its stuff. It came with jQuery, which was cool. And it had a really nice UI. So we gave it a try, or I gave it a try, and pretty quickly was able to spin up, sites really, really fast. And so it became a really useful tool. And then as they started adding more and more features on the CMS, I think they added e-commerce, which was interesting for a little bit of time. um, but some of those features were really great. And so, yeah, I got on the Webflow train pretty early.
Right. So I think you said something like about 6 years or so that you've been using it.
Yeah.
So that was pre-CMS. So
yeah, you could just make pages.
yeah, and so obviously, the CMS being added just sort of extended what you could do with it, or did it change how you approach things, or
So
what
now
kind
with
of work you could do?
CMS, so because we did a lot of applications, product stuff, we were designing the actual software products. As usual, we were always asked, hey, we need a website to market said software product. I'm like, well, cool, we can do that too. And we need something fast. So a good option or tool that we could use was Webflow.
Right, right.
Using Interactions 1.0, which was terrible.
Got to start somewhere, right? After all those years with Flash and whatnot, it was probably a little different.
Yeah.
But is Webflow always the right choice for it? Is that all you use now, or do you sometimes have to make other choices?
So our stack at Ready Set Go is Webflow for marketing sites that are generally just like single sites. Maybe we have a site that's also translated. We'll use something like Weglot for translation, or we'll just make two, like the CMS is just split between English and French.
Right.
But for more complex things, the stack we generally use is React. It's a MERN stack, basically. Mongo, Express, React, and Node.
So you wouldn't do something like that CHL assist site with all of those sites within
no,
Webflow?
because I didn't. So like you could build your pages in Webflow and then export them and then create the templates in a different templating language. But that just seems like overkill, especially when you have amazing CSS frameworks like Tailwind, which I freaking love. That doesn't become like a hindrance anymore, or it doesn't really hold you back. You can just build pretty quickly, with the advantage of developer ergonomics. So being able to write all your code, deploy it, put it in a staging environment, have it version controlled in Git or in GitHub. You have all of this development environment and support from your developers as well that are used to environments like that.
Right.
Versus copying and pasting little snippets of code and headers and footers and doing weird stuff.
Right. So we're getting close to the end here, but I want to talk about what you were doing during the pandemic, because it's a little different than what you do in your sort of general everyday life. You were doing dry aged beef steaks.
There's two projects. There's two projects that I started doing.
Oh, okay.
There's two. One was a work-related one, and which was the Webflow school, which was cool. So I'll touch on that really quickly, and then I'll tell you about the beef project, which was hilarious. Yep. So the Webflow one was really around, taking the opportunity when we didn't have a ton of work to try to give back to the community as much as possible. So I created the Webflow school, and I designed a couple of introductory courses. And in the course of 4 months, I taught 500 people how to use Webflow. So I think that was pretty cool. It was a lot of fun. So I did that. That was cool.
And
And then,
one of your students from that first cohort is here. Just wanted to jump in and
oh,
shout
there
out.
he is, Anshul. Hey,
Yeah,
buddy.
yeah,
Yeah, there he is. Yeah, yeah, he's the best.
yeah, yeah. And
Um,
so
and
the other one?
I think I actually met Maggie through that as well somehow, or something like that.
Okay,
Somehow I met Maggie that way.
right.
So that was cool. It was really nice to be able to, you know, to do that for for the Webflow community, or for the community at large, for people that are, you know,
Hmm.
entering the business, as a
Yeah.
person that's been in it and taken advantage of other great mentors throughout my career. Um, and then the crazy side project was, yeah, I have this food thing that's kind of like an obsession, and I wanted to I wanted to see if I could um, start a business dry aging beef and selling it online. So I met a farmer on Instagram. That's actually just an hour up the road from my house in Listowel, and he runs a Wagyu farm. It's called what's it called? Grazing Meadows Wagyu. His name is Tim Pryor. Hi, Tim. He will not be watching this for sure. Anyway, so I went over. He gave me a tour of his farm, and I left with a half Wagyu that I then had to. I mean, I didn't put it in my truck or anything, but it was made available to me. And then I dry aged a bunch of pieces, and I bought fridges, and I created like this entire dry aging setup in my condo where I work. Then I bought all this packaging materials, made a website. It's called Steak Almighty, so you can look it up on Instagram at Steak Almighty. And yeah, I taught myself craft butchery and packaging, and it's a wild project. Yeah,
Wow.
and I figured the worst thing that could happen is that I eat a lot of Wagyu, which is what I did. Yeah, the business is
Yeah.
not successful at all, but my God,
Oh
I
no.
learned
Well,
so many fun things.
Patrick's suggesting that the next Webflow meetup that we have, there should be dry aged steaks.
You're
So,
gonna have to
you know.
give me a minimum of like 4 months in advance, because I buy my beef right now from a farmer in Sudbury, called Pure Island Beef. Her name is Bargett, and she ships me like grass-fed beef, which is wild.
Oh.
And I butcher that too. It's crazy. Well, if you look at it on Instagram at Steak Almighty, you'll see funny pictures.
Cool.
And I'm into food
Excellent.
photography too.
All right. So, I think we've got some questions that we wanted to get your take on. Anybody, Maggie or Jeremy, you want to jump in and pop those in?
Sure. It's just more general things like since the Webflow had some big announcements yesterday, I just wanted to know like what you think about yesterday's announcements, or any in particular. Oh, but you said you might have missed that. But yeah, I guess mainly.
What's the announcement? Remind me again.
I know.
Oh.
I just realized you said in our prep thing that you didn't actually watch the stream, but to get away from, or to deprioritize logic and
Logic and memberships. Yeah. Yes, I knew about that one. So I think that's fine. I mean, so I mentioned e-commerce earlier because as part of my steak business, I actually tried using Webflow e-commerce to build Steak Almighty. And very quickly, I ran into some really obvious problems, just with like inventory management and invoicing and notifications and integrations with like marketing automation. And so I was like, okay, well, this is too much work for something that should be quite straightforward. So I didn't feel like the e-commerce product was mature enough. And so I switched that from Webflow to Shopify and used Klaviyo for all the marketing automation, and Shopify's ecosystem is of course very, very mature. You can do incredible things with it. And
right.
Trying to build e-commerce in Webflow is I would just straight up not recommend it, unless you're selling, I don't know, buttons, which is
Right.
pretty good, or stickers. it's like maybe
Right.
some really generic merch that would be fine. But if you're trying to actually operate a business like an e-commerce store, Webflow's not the right choice. Take it from a guy who tried, and I really wanted it to work because I designed all kinds of cool stuff, and it's harder to design all that in Shopify. So I think taking the focus off memberships and logic is a similar thing because there's a lot to be done on the CMS, on components, hopefully with class naming as well. Maybe finally making global classes like a top priority where you can actually import classes and you can import CSS libraries that you've written instead of having to hand bomb every single one or duplicate projects. Like those kinds of ergonomic things. I always talk about developer ergonomics, but the same is true for designer ergonomics. And those are the things that make a product fun to use and easy to use and scalable. So hopefully they'll continue down that route. I never really had the beta for Logic anyways. I did have the beta for memberships. But MemberStack is going to stick around, I guess.
Yeah.
So they're like, yes, they're breathing a massive sigh of relief. So,
Yeah.
Will you consider using DevLink once it's available? Will that sort of solve some of the issues that when you can't use Webflow?
I don't know. DevLink is interesting where, so for people who don't know what DevLink is, and hopefully I'm describing what it is correctly, you can create components inside Webflow and then export them as React components that you can then use in your development environment. Does that more or less capture it? I think that's okay. But again, when you look at, your React environments where you're actually building components from scratch, or you're using Storybook to actually test your components with all of its variants and data inputs and your data binding, you'll want to use tools that are more of a natural fit with those environments. So when I talk about Tailwind, and I mentioned them earlier, that's a more natural fit than hand bombing your class names that you might do inside Webflow and then exporting those and then importing a class framework that's an export from Webflow. It just doesn't feel very natural. So DevLink is, I don't know, I wouldn't use it.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll have to see once it comes out, once we're able to start working with it. Yeah.
Let's see. Maybe
I've got a question. I'm curious about like things that I guess people now that are building sites, like, because I think your priorities and the experience that you have is kind of different into a lot of ways that, like, even I would approach a site or something like that. But I think there's so much we could learn from, like, what would you say are kind of guideposts or quick or things that we can add into a process that would just make what we're building better. I think if that is not too
sure. I think before we actually think about making something flashier or adding more animation or any of this other stuff is because there's a point of diminishing returns, right? Like after which it's like, okay, there's no amount of pizzazz and pop and doing whatever that will drive more conversions, more business, more outcomes, more leads. Like it's just at some point it's just going to stop. And you just got to be, and not to say that you shouldn't do those things, because some of those things are important for you to represent your brand in that particular way. So I think you got to make sure that you've sorted the business out first. And once you know that all of these business parts are doing the job that they're supposed to do, then you've got to evaluate, how far should you take this design and all the interactions and animations that you might add to it. And does that align with the style and brand of the product that you're building? And does it still deliver all of that business value. So you can still be wildly creative, and you absolutely should, as a guy who built ridiculous websites for like almost a decade that had no purpose whatsoever. You should still do that stuff, but don't lose sight of the business requirements. That's why you're doing it.
Right.
Just
Purposeful.
going back to the jobs to be done kind of idea of things,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
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 All
I mean,
right.
if somebody gets on that website and leaves after 1 second, well, you kind of messed up.
Mhm.
Right. Exactly. That's not
Just
the
add
point.
some pixel hands and some.
Yeah, pixel hands, a super long preloader, and you're good. I think preload is 1 gig website. Yes, amazing.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Okay, well, we're at the end of our hour. I don't know where the time goes, but thank you so much for being
Thank
with
you so
us.
much. I'm so grateful for this. It's fun.
Great. So Dayton, how can people find you online? What's the best way for them to connect if they want to know more? Or
I'm literally the easiest person to find online. It's terrible. You could steal my identity just by knowing my last name. Yeah, that way. ReadySetGo.design, at Dayton P on Twitter, which I'm never on, at Dayton Pereira on Instagram, and it's mostly food pics. But yeah, my
Cool.
email is like listed everywhere, so I'm easy to
All
find.
right. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our 9th Northern Showcase. We'd like to thank you all for joining us and remind you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And if you can, join us at our Vancouver meetup in June. I'd love to see you there. Meg?
And yeah, thanks for watching this podcast. And if you want to know more about Nocode North, go to our website at nocodenorth.com and sign up for our mailing list to receive all of our latest updates. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And join us on Fridays in the lodge, our cool gather space. Our lodge hangouts are open to everyone.
Great.
Awesome.
And until next time,
Till
Bye.
next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.